Hey chess kids, Liam Murphy here with a game analysis. Today we're going to be looking at a game between two huge YouTubers. That would be Ludwig playing with the white pieces versus Mr. Beast playing with the black pieces. In fact, for this game there was a wager of $10,000 each, so the winner will be taking home $20,000. Let's jump into the game. Ludwig opens up with e4 and Mr. Beast responds with d5, the Scandinavian defense. Ludwig captures the pawn and Mr. Beast captures with his queen. Here, Ludwig plays the move knight c3, which is the best move. It is called developing your piece with tempo. The knight is attacking the queen must move, and then Ludwig will get to develop another piece. So a fantastic move with knight c3 there, and Mr. Beast plays queen a5, a very normal square. The queen can also usually retreat to d6, d8, there are a ton of different moves there. Here, Ludwig plays knight f3, getting another piece into the game. At the start of the game, you want to develop your minor pieces, your knights and your bishops, and you want to castle your king. Here, Mr. Beast plays knight c6. Not the most normal way to play the Scandinavian. Usually the c-pawn moves at some point, giving your queen this diagonal to retreat on. But he develops his knight to c6, and Ludwig plays bishop e2. Bishop e2 is a little passive. The bishop is not attacking any squares on the opponent's side of the board. It is strictly stopping if the bishop goes to g4, for example, from pinning the knight to your queen. A better move may have been d4 or bishop c4. However, bishop e2 certainly doesn't lose the game and allows you to castle next turn. Here, Mr. Beast plays bishop f5, getting a super active bishop, looking at squares on the opponent's side of the board. And if I was Ludwig, I would have castled here, but Ludwig plays a3. Okay, a3, definitely not the best move, but I believe he was worried about knight b4. He was seeing, as we might say, ghost. Knight b4 is not an actual threat. He was worried of knight b4, and then the knight capturing on c2 with the bishop supporting it, forking the king and the rook. However, if he castles, and then Mr. Beast did play knight b4, Ludwig could have played a move such as d3. The bishop is no longer staying c2. The knight cannot jump into c2 or the queen will capture it. And so really knight b4 would just be a waste of a turn. So instead of castling, Ludwig played a3, worried about knight b4, and Mr. Beast queenside castles. Okay, so the rook is now lined up with the queen here on d1, and he needs to get his kingside pieces into the game. If I was Ludwig, I would again castle on my kingside here. But let's see what he does. He plays d3. So he was worried about the pressure going down the d file here. He wanted to really over support the pawn on d3 with his pieces and make sure that he did not lose his queen. Here, Mr. Beast plays a fantastic move, e5, allowing his dark squared bishop to get out and allowing his pawn to control the center squares on the chessboard. And again, if I was Ludwig here, I would have castled. And when he castles here, if he did, well, what we would have had is a position where Ludwig castles on the king side of the board and Mr. Beast castles on the queen side of the board. And that is called opposite side castling. And when you get opposite side castling in chess, usually you want to do something called pawn storming. So if Ludwig had castled, he could have pawn stormed with moves like b4, b5, trying to get rid of his pawns even to open up files to the enemy king. And Mr. Beast should be going for moves like h6, g5, g4, trying to pawn storm the white king. Instead of that, Ludwig plays bishop d2, lining the bishop up with the enemy king, never a bad idea, and freeing the knight to move. The knight could not move before because the king would be in check. Mr. Beast continues to develop his minor pieces with knight f6, a great move. And again here, if I was Ludwig, I would castle my king, but he goes for knight e4. Knight e4 is not the best move at all. However, it is a little tricky. Knight e4 is called a discovered attack. The bishop on d2 was blocked by the knight from seeing the queen, and when the knight moves, the bishop discovers an attack on the queen on a5. I would call this hope chess. Ludwig is hoping that Mr. Beast does not see that the bishop is attacking the queen. Knight e4 is not a great move, and you really shouldn't be playing hope chess moves, just hoping your opponent makes mistakes. You should just try to find the best moves. That's why castling the king probably would have been a better move here. Here, Mr. Beast plays queen d5, a great response to knight e4. The queen is in the center of the chessboard now, where she is very powerful. If the queen can stay in the center of the chessboard and not be harassed by enemy minor pieces, it's a fantastic piece. Here, Ludwig plays a move I do not like, which is knight takes f6. Now, you may be asking yourself, what's so bad about that? You're trading knights. You're doubling up the enemy pawns after they capture back. Well, the reason why knight takes f6 is not a good move is Ludwig wants to castle on the king side of the board. And what he's done is he's opened up the g file for Mr. Beast to put his rook on and start attacking the king. You do not want to usually do that. You want to keep your king nice and safe. King safety, one of the most important things in chess. So I would not be, enthusiastic about casting on the king side with my opponent having the g file. Here, Ludwig finally castles, and Mr. Beast plays the best move in the position, which is rook g8, lining the rook up with the king, trying to get some checkmates, going down on g2 if he can. And here, Ludwig plays g3. G3 is not a move you want to make. You usually do not want to move the pawns around your king. And when he moves his g-pawn, he creates major light square weaknesses around his king, which, of course, Mr. Beast has a light squared bishop that can make use of these. I would be definitely worried as white here. Mr. Beast can do moves like h5, h4, capture, trying to open up more files to the king, and trying to deliver a quick checkmate. Mr. Beast instead responds with e4, looking to open up perhaps the d file if the pawn captures back, creating a little, opening up lines to the king, opening up files. Notice that he's not developed his dark squared bishop. You usually want to get all of your pieces into the game if you're going to be attacking the king. So a move like bishop c5 probably would have been a better move, lining the bishop up with the king on this diagonal. Ludwig responds with c4. This is not a good move. Yes, it does attack the queen, but again, it's a little hope chessy. Of course, Mr. Beast is going to see that. He's going to move his queen, and what you're left with is what we call a backwards pawn, a pawn that cannot be defended by its teammate pawns for 1-2 turns. That's a backwards pawn. And so moving the queen out of danger and then looking to, the knight is being attacked, so the knight has to move. Then you can capture on d3. All would have been great things for Mr. Beast. So Mr. Beast plays queen c5, sidestepping the threat of c4. And Ludwig plays bishop e3. The bishop is now attacking Mr. Beast's queen. Now, this is a key point in the game. What will Mr. Beast do? Oh no, he sacrifices his queen for the bishop. He must have just forgot that the f-pawn was protecting the bishop. In chess, you have to think where your opponent's pieces are attacking. So unfortunately, he blunders his queen, a 9-point piece, for a 3-point piece by capturing the bishop. What Mr. Beast could have done instead is, actually the best move would have been to capture on f3 with the pawn. Now I know what you may be thinking. What? The bishop's just going to attack your queen. Well, okay, so the bishop takes the queen, and then what Mr. Beast could have done is not take the bishop on c5, is he could have captured on e2. And now here, of course, if the bishop captures on f8, well, then you would promote to a queen, and the rook would be forced to capture back. So instead, the queen must capture on e2, and only then does Mr. Beast scoop up the bishop on c5. Now, if you count the points in this position, a queen is worth 9 points, bishops and knights are worth 3 points each, so 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 9. The points are the same. However, the bishops and the knight are almost always better than one queen because of the amount of squares they can control on the chessboard and because of how active these pieces are. Active pieces staring at your opponent's side of the camp. So these bishops and knights could have dominated a lot of squares on the chessboard and made it very hard for the one queen. That's the same concept of why a knight and a bishop, 6 points, is almost always better than a pawn and a rook, 6 points, because they can control more squares on the chessboard. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Mr. Beast blundered his queen. Ludwig, of course, captured back. and now Mr. Beast is in trouble. He needs to try to get tricky. He lost a queen. He's down substantial material. So he captures the knight at least. Ludwig captures with the rook. I think capturing with the bishop maybe would have been a little bit better, lining this bishop up with the king, but attacking with the rook, he's going to hit the bishop with tempo and try to capture the f-pawn. Mr. Beast saves his light squared bishop, and only then does Ludwig capture the f-pawn. And here, Mr. Beast plays h5. He actually is getting the pawn storm in the position. However, it's too little too late. And don't forget, guys, he never developed his dark squared bishop, again, leaving it back on f8, where it's a very sad bishop. Here, Ludwig captures the bishop on g6. Not the best move by any means, and probably an unnecessary move. A rook is worth 5 points in chess. A bishop only worth 3. So he's giving up material here, which is fine to do when you're winning by a lot, which he is. However, if you're going to go down what we call the exchange, trading your rook for a knight or bishop, I think capturing the knight on c6 would have been better, because when the b-pawn captures back, the king is very weak with these open diagonals and these open files next to him that can be used to attack him. So instead, Ludwig captures the bishop on g6, the pawn captures back, and now he lines his bishop up with the knight on c6, a great idea here. Mr. Beast finally gets his last minor piece into the game with bishop g7, putting it on the long diagonal, and Ludwig captures the knight on c6, an excellent move, as we talked before, really weakening the enemy king. Although Mr. Beast does not capture the bishop on c6, he instead goes with a threat of his own, capturing the pawn on b2. And here, Ludwig plays queen b1. What? Does he not see that the bishop can capture the rook? Well, ChessKid's not so fast. If the bishop did capture the rook on a1, Ludwig has what we call an X-ray attack, and queen to b7 would have been all they wrote. This is a checkmate. The queen is attacking the king. The king cannot run anywhere. And of course, you cannot capture the queen. Now, Mr. Beast did see that threat, and he played rook d6. And here, Ludwig played an excellent move. He captured on b7 first, what we call an intermezzo. He did not pick up the bishop yet. First, he checks the king, picking up a pawn. The king captures back, and only then does he capture the bishop on b2 with a check. So he got a pawn and a bishop for a bishop, winning a little bit of material. Mr. Beast retreats his king to c8, and rook b1, another excellent move by Ludwig, lining up his queen and rook for a battery on the b file, threatening some devastating checks. Mr. Beast captures the pawn on d3. Really, Mr. Beast is in trouble. Unless Ludwig makes a huge mistake, he should lose this game. And unfortunately, queen b8 is skewering the king to the rook. The king will move, and Ludwig takes the free rook on g8. From here, the rook captures on e3, and Ludwig starts checking the king. Mr. Beast is trying to be Pac-Man with the pawns, but Ludwig is as well, capturing the pawn on g6 with check. The king moves to d7, getting the last piece into the game. An excellent move. When you're attacking the king, you want all of your pieces participating in the attack if you're going to be delivering checkmate. So he plays rook d1, and here Mr. Beast plays king e7, unfortunately losing his rook to the devastating fork of queen g5, checking the king, attacking the rook. The king must move, and Ludwig picks up the rook. And unfortunately here, actually, Mr. Beast resigns the game. However, if the game had continued, there would have been checkmate in about 4 moves with something like king f7, rook f1, queen g6, queen e6. If you go to g5 here, actually h4 would be checkmate. Let's show that. With the queen cutting off these squares and checking the king. And if the king runs back, it's just going to be a simple mate in 2 with rook f7. The king runs to g8 or h8. And then the queen delivers the checkmate on the 8th rank. So, an excellent game from both parties. I would say both sides need to work on the fundamentals a little bit, developing your pieces, getting your king castled. And if you like this video, make sure you smash the like button and subscribe button for more great chess content. Thank you, chess kids.